So for those of you who don't know what Extinction Rebellion is yet, so it's basically a movement of civic disobedience doing direct action for the climate. It's non-violent, started in the UK about a year ago, and it's all about raising awareness about actually how bad the situation is, about the climate emergency, but also about going to the next level, because we've been marching for the climate for so long and really nothing is happening. So we need to step up our game. And the way to do that is through direct action, non-violent direct action and civic disobedience.
Roger has been an activist for over 30 years, and he has also done some research on civil disobedience. And in January 2017, he had the idea to paint with chalk-based paint on the floor of the King's College where he was doing his PhD, "Please divest in oil and gas." And then he repeated this very action in February 2017, and then he got arrested for it. He went to trial for 3 days, and he was set free from all charges, arguing that this action was actually proportionate to the climate crisis that we are facing. So this is very hopeful. And then in March 2017, he did a hunger strike that made the King's College divest in oil and gas for over £14 million. These things are the things that inspire us, that want us to rebel, that want us to act, and that's why we are here for. So I would really like you to give an amazing applause for Roger Hallam and to give him a warm welcome.
It's a very nice place. Thanks. I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen. I thought we might be meeting in some cafe or something. So, I hope I don't disappoint everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, so I'm going to talk for about 20-30 minutes or something, and then Extinction Rebellion likes to be a fairly participatory affair, so we can have a bit of a break, and you can talk to the people next to you about why I've got it all wrong, and what have you, and then you can, then I'm going to carry on for a bit, and then we'll have some questions. So I hope that's okay. I think I've got an hour, is that right? Right, okay, so yeah, that's a very nice introduction, thank you. Yeah, I have been on hunger strike, get quite hungry, but I haven't done that for a while. And I have been arrested a lot of times, been to prison a few times, so I'm not your normal academic. But I am an academic as well, and I'm not going to do some big rhetorical sort of speech for you guys because it's not really my style. But I am going to go through some of the research on how to be effective, and there's a place for rhetoric and there's also a place for seriously thinking about how we're going to deal with this emergency, which is, if we're to believe the science, more threatening than anything else in the history of humanity. So I just want to say something first though about my personal experience, because I don't know if you know, but I've been an organic vegetable farmer for 20 years, and for most of that time I was looking at the soil, weeding spinach and things like that, so I didn't really have that much to do with human beings. And I didn't really want to have that much to do with human beings. But how life changes. So since I started doing research, I did a paper on why climate change, like crisis, was going to bring down the economic and political systems, at least in the Western world, over the next 2 or 3 years, and that led to the foundation of Extinction Rebellion in April last year, when 15 heretics got together in a cafe. Wasn't a very nice cafe either, but and we decided we were going to have a rebellion. And as you can imagine, we all felt a little bit silly about it because it's not a normal thing to do. But we did it anyway, and as everyone probably knows, it's turned into a global movement, and now there's 100,000 people signed up in the UK, and tens of thousands of people around Europe signed up. And I just want to say that over the last 2 years, everything's changed dramatically, I would say, on the climate debate. And my prediction is, you haven't seen anything yet, that what's going to happen over the next 2 years is going to blow your minds. And it's going to blow the minds of the people in Brussels and all around Europe, because we're on the verge of some of the biggest social and political, emotional and spiritual changes the human race has ever seen. Because, as you may know, we're heading into an extinction event. So I just want to give you a little flavour of my new life. As I say, usually I'm reading spinach and stuff, and now I'm in this big office in London, and every day some important person phones me up and wants to talk to me and stuff. And about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I talked to a billionaire. I'm not sure whether he was a billionaire, but he was quite rich anyway. And he knows Bill Gates, so that sounds like rich, doesn't it? Anyway, so he's mates with Bill, and anyway, I had to talk to him, so I was a little bit nervous, as you can imagine. And anyway, it turns out that his house was burnt down in one of the forest fires ravaging California. So he's not happy. In fact, he was in a total panic. And he said to me, "Roger, whatever it takes." So that's quite interesting coming from someone like that. And then a week or two before that, we got phoned up by this diplomat, and I have to confess I'm not that well up on diplomats, but it was a top one, on a top diplomat. I don't know what they're called, but maybe you know that. Anyway, the upshot of it is he's one of the organisers of COP, and I don't know if everyone knows, maybe people do know, but there's this thing called the COP, and every year all the important people around the world get together to sort out climate change, and every year they get together and decide to do nothing about climate change. And you might be familiar with that routine, and that's been going on for 30 years. Anyway, I thought he was going to say, "Oh, come and do a speech or something." Anyway, it turns out that what he wants Extinction Rebellion to do is cause chaos at COP. Chaos. We're going to see what we can do. But yeah, he wants us to close it down. This is the guy organising it, right? I don't know. So anyone who wants to fly to Chile, then you know what to do. So, and then a few months ago, we were phoned up by this BBC journalist. So it's this top BBC journalist. I think it was during the April Rebellion. He phones us up to tell us how to effectively close down Parliament. So this is a guy on telly every other night wanting us to shut down the British state. So that's interesting as well. So I want to try and communicate that I've been propelled into this sort of movie, where every week these weird and wonderful things happen. And my proposition to you guys is that in the next year, you're going to be propelled into this movie as well. And I think people of my generation, and maybe lots of you, have this idea that history is something that happened to other people in another time, in another place. It's the films, it's the documentaries, and that isn't us, because we live in this time when history has ended and everything's nice and calm and civilised. But it's not going to carry on like that. sooner or later, and I predict in the next year, you're going to get propelled into this mad movie. And very quickly after that, the people of Brussels are, and the people of Belgium are, and the people of Europe are. And they haven't quite worked that out, which is why they're not in this hall tonight. But they will be soon. And the reason why is because people want to know what's going on. And I think for 30 years, we've been lied to, haven't we? By the diplomats and the experts and the politicians. They've said, we can sort this out, you know, leave it up to us, we're doing the reports, we're doing all these special documents, and leave it up to us, and it'll be fine. But it hasn't been fine, and the penny's dropped that these people are going to take us to our death. That's the reality of the situation, and they're not going to do anything. And as it happens, now that I'm semi-famous, I get to talk to a lot of these people, and I can tell you they're not going to do anything. The only people that are going to do anything are you guys in the room. So, welcome to history. So I'm going to tell you a little bit before I get on to the nitty-gritty of how to bring down governments and what have you. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the climate crisis. Because I think one of the biggest problems about this whole climate change business is people don't actually talk about it. I mean, they don't really talk about what's happening. I used to go to all these meetings, there was lots of climate activists there for my research, and they talked about loads of things, but they didn't actually talk about the science. And one of the reasons why people don't talk about it, because it's so fucking awful, right? I mean, who wants to talk about it? But what Extinction Rebellion has done, and one of the reasons we've been successful, is that we've basically given ourselves permission to actually look at it and feel the emotions that that brings up in us. Because only when you emotionally connect with the horror and the grief of what's coming down the road will you find the strength to actually act in a way that's effective. So I'm just going to go through my favourite, if that's the right word, killer facts. So the first one is about the Arctic. You may know this, the Arctic's melting, and it's nothing unusual. And it's ice, it gets warm and it melts. You don't need an expert to tell you that. And it turns out that the ice is melted, 70% of it's melted in the summer, in the last 30 years. And it's been in the news, hasn't it, this week about Alaska and Greenland and what have you. So it's not like melted 2%, that would be of concern, or it's not melted by 10%, that would be a reason to panic. No, it's melted by 70%. And there's a Harvard professor 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he said it's 100% guaranteed to be, all the permanent ice is going to be melted by the end of 2022. But you don't need to be a Harvard professor to work this out. You can go and look at the charts, right? It's ice, it melts because it's warm, and it's going to go. Don't need to be an expert. And when it's gone, this is a thing called the latent heat effect, which means that the ocean will warm up dramatically and the jet stream will become chaotic, which basically means the weather systems are going to become chaotic in about 10 years. And that means what they don't tell you, which is you're not going to be able to grow food. And then they don't tell you what that means. But what that means is people are going to starve. The scientists don't do those last 2 bits, if you notice that. Because they don't want to upset people. But that's the fact of the matter, is people will starve. The second killer fact is that we've warmed the planet by, 1.1 degrees. Most people know that. And we've got this Paris thing. So most people that talk about climate change, don't they, talk about this Paris Agreement thing. The fact of the matter is, the Paris Agreement is the biggest act of mass delusion in global history. It's rubbish. I'm in academia, I talk to academics all the time, and they all know it's rubbish. It's a big lie. 2 degrees centigrade is already locked in. Because we put loads of carbon into the atmosphere already, and it doesn't come through for 30 years. So even if we stop putting carbon into the atmosphere tomorrow, it's still going to warm up the world. In the scientific literature, it predicts by 0.7 degrees. So that takes us up to what? 1.8. There's a sort of brutal maths going on here. And it turns out that once we've got rid of fossil fuels, the pollution that it creates will fall to the earth. And the earth will warm up even more because there's no pollution hiding the sun's rays. So that could be up to 0.7. So let's say that's 2.5. There was an article in The Guardian the other day. I don't know if you read The Guardian, but they do these articles every now and again that sort of basically say it's over. They don't actually say that. But there's an article that said that the latest research is that when you heat up the world, you heat up the soils, and when you heat up the soils, they let out carbon, and that's going to heat up the world by 1 degree centigrade by 2050. So I make that, what, 3.5, and that's before methane, before the Amazon gets cut down, before the forest fires, before 50 feedbacks in the scientific peer-reviewed literature that are going to lock in. So I don't know where anyone got the 2 degree idea from, apart from the PR departments. You know, we're heading to hell. That's the reality of the situation. And then the third killer fact is that in pre-industrial times there was 280 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, and it's been going up exponentially for the last 100 years. So this is, again, it's pretty simple, brutal, basic scientific maths. So it used to be going up 1 part per million, now it's 2, it was 2. When I started telling people about the climate crisis, I felt a little bit embarrassed, because they used to say, it's going to go up 3 parts per million soon. And last year it went up by 3.5 parts per million. So it's on 415 now. And so we can do a bit of maths. If you take 10 times 3.5, that's 35, plus 415. In 10 years' time, it's going to be 450 parts per million. And that's the same as 2 degrees centigrade locked in. So it's coming down the line. There's also an article, I don't know if anyone saw it this week. I mean, there's articles every week, right? I'm just giving you a little latest update. That the scientists that are feeding into the IPCC report in 2021, it's leaked that they've done like climate sensitivity analysis, which basically means how much it heats up as you put more carbon into the atmosphere. So it turns out that most of the reports are now predicting 5 degrees centigrade at 560 parts per million. 560 parts per million is going to happen in the next 20 to 30 years. 5 degrees centigrade. So everyone know what happens at 5 degrees centigrade. There's a scientist who spent like 30, 40 years doing research on it. Says at 5 degrees centigrade there's going to be 1 billion people left on the planet, huddled around the poles. Because he's a scientist, he doesn't tell you the whole story, but you can work it out. Where have the other 6 or 7 billion people gone? They've all been slaughtered in war and starved to death. So there's some killer facts about the climate. And obviously, it's worse than that, isn't it? Because the thing that the climate scientists don't tell you, and the politicians don't tell you, is the main thing that's going to happen is social collapse. It's about the social implications of all this. It's not about the polar bears and the ice and the temperature. It's that states are going to collapse because they haven't got any money because of the chaos. When states don't have any money, it means poor people don't get any welfare checks. It means they can't send their kids to school. There's no universities. There's no hospital beds. And this is what I'm going around Britain at the moment saying is, if you want to mobilise people about the climate crisis, talk about their pensions, talk about house prices, talk about what's going to happen to their kids when they're sent off by fascists to protect us from migrants in southern Europe. That's what's happening. that's when you'll know what the climate crisis has happened. That's a universal message, right? And then we're going to run out of food. There's a guy that I know who's a sustainability professor. He predicts there's going to be mass starvation in Europe in the next 3 years. Right? He's a top professor, he's not an idiot. Because food production was down last year 20% in North America and Europe and Russia for the first time ever. And it didn't get any cooler this year, did it? It's totally real. It's 46 degrees in France, 42 degrees in Germany. Last week it was 38 degrees in London. Highest temperature ever. It's like moving through treacle. I'm an organic grower, I'm a farmer. I can't grow anymore outside because I can't afford the risk. There's farmers all around the world are shitting themselves. Hundreds of millions of farmers are shitting themselves because they don't know what to grow anymore. It's not good. So, what to do? One of the things about mobilising people is you have to tell them the truth. A lot of people get confused about this. They say, if I tell you what I've just said to you in the last quarter of an hour, they're going to get depressed and despairing and all the rest of it. And they're true, it's true. People will get despairing and depressed. But some people will decide to act. Some people will decide it's so bad they can't live with themselves any longer and they need to act. And the severity of the truth mobilises them to act in an effective way. So I predict that maybe 50% of you will go away depressed and you won't do anything. Maybe 50% of you will. And that 50% of you that will are going to change the world. I'm not exaggerating. Done research on it. So, in the 1960s, there's a guy called Martin Luther King. He had this bright idea of using civil disobedience to transform the lives of black people in the American South. People in the American South have been working for 70 years using conventional campaigning techniques to improve the lot of black people. They've gone to see their representatives, they've had petitions, they've sent letters. Does this sound familiar? And haven't got anywhere. And in 10 years, Martin Luther King transformed the environment. But the joke is that he only had 2 books to go on. The autobiography of Gandhi and the Bible. But the good news is, since then, there's been systematic research on how to rapidly change society in a progressive way, effectively. And one of the main academics is called Erica Chenworth. She came and did a lecture to the UK earlier in the year. And she's done 10 years research on it. And she said, we no longer have any excuses. So my suggestion to you is you no longer have any excuses because we know what to do. And what we need to do is mass participation, civil disobedience. This is what works. It's what works. The campaigning that's been happening for the last 30 years has not worked. I've been doing it, I'm sure a lot of you have been doing it, and we're all great people, and we've all been working really hard, but it hasn't worked. Carbon emissions have gone up 60% since 1990. Everything I've just told you at the beginning of this lecture was told to people in 1990 by scientists. Nothing fundamentally has changed. We've just had 30 years of failure. So I'm briefly going to show you how it works. I'm going to talk to you about civil disobedience, then I'm going to have a little break, and then I'm going to talk to you about how to build a movement. And then we can have some questions. So civil disobedience works for 3 reasons. First of all, it's disruptive. The first rule of rapidly changing a corrupt society is nothing's going to happen unless you disrupt that society. For the simple reason that no one's going to take notice of you unless you're disrupting their lives. And attention is the first step towards social change. No attention, no change. The second thing about disruption is it costs the bad guys money. We're in a society where money counts. And the people that run society, if they don't have the money because you're disrupting things, that's what brings them to the table. This is nothing unusual, right? In 1880, the working classes of Europe discovered the labour strike. They worked out if you go and ask the employer for a pay increase, they say no. If you withdraw the labour, that costs them money. And they come to the table and they give you a pay increase. Not every time, no guarantees, but it works. So what we have to do is disrupt the elites and the people that are making lots of money out of the destruction of our civilization. The second thing is sacrifice. It's a terrible thing to say, but the fact of the matter is, unless people suffer for the cause, you're not going to be effective. And we've had 30 years, haven't we, of being told we can have activism without suffering. Okay? You send the £3 to Friends of the Earth, to Greenpeace, you send off the emails, you go to the meetings, you go on the march, nothing's really costing you much. That's why you're being ineffective. You have to suffer. And I'm not saying that because I'm some Calvinist extremist, okay? I'm saying it because it works. So how does it work? Because action speaks louder than words. If you go and get yourself arrested, if you go to prison, if you get hit on the head by the police, and variations on the theme, then people take you seriously because they empathise with your suffering. And this is what happens all over the world when regimes are brought down. The regime goes and attacks the demonstrators. People see it happening, they feel emotional empathy, and they go down and join the demonstrators. You have to draw out the violence of the system so that everyone can see that violence explicitly. That's how civil resistance works. And lastly, you have to be respectful. It's very tempting to say horrible things about people that are doing horrible things, but it's not optimal. If you want to get into negotiations with the Belgian government, then treat them with respect. Disrupt them like hell, but treat them with respect. And if you follow what Gandhi did and Martin Luther King did, they were all into disruption, but when they entered the negotiation room, they were very respectful. And it turns out when you treat people decently, they're more likely to treat you decently. So I'm going to give you 3 quick examples of this. In 1931, Gandhi, with 78 followers, started the Salt March. It's the most famous act of civil disobedience in the 20th century. He only started off with 78 people. It's about half the people in this room. That's not a hint. Could be. he set off to the coast to make salt in the sea. The first thing about doing civil disobedience is to choose something that's very innocent and obvious and normal, but also happens to be totally illegal. And the British authorities said it wouldn't allow him to do it, and to cut a long story short, they lined up in a row, and as Gandhi's followers approached, they got their truncheons out and split open their heads. There was blood everywhere, photos were taken, film was taken, it went around the world, and there was an international outcry because the violence of the British occupation of India was made explicit in that moment for all the world to see through the peaceful sacrifice of those Indians. This is what happens when people are serious about bringing about change. Because if you read the history of that period, the Salt March was the point at which Indians realised that the British were not civilised after all, and they needed to be got rid of. And that was the tipping point. And 10, 15 years later, they got their independence. And if we fast forward to the civil rights movement, there were, one of the campaigns was called the Freedom Riders. It started off with 25 people. There's about a quarter of the people in this room. So don't pretend that you can't change society without a lot of people, okay? It all depends on what you do. So those 25 students decided to get on the buses, black and white students next to each other, and they went down to the American South. But all the rest of the civil rights movement phoned them up and said, don't do that, it's really stupid, you're going to upset people, it's not going to work. This is the second lesson, which is when you engage in high-level civil disobedience, everyone thinks it's a bad idea, okay? When I did my hunger strike at King's College, all the seasoned activists, you know what they said? It's a really bad idea. Turned out to be the fastest divestment campaign ever, because it involved sacrifice. So those guys, they went down in the buses, and you know what happened? The Ku Klux Klan set light to the coach, pulled them out and beat them up. But what happened next? Is 25 more students went down, and they got hauled up in a big coach station surrounded by a mob. What happened then was on the front pages of the newspapers. Because when you draw the violence out from the system, everyone starts reading about it. It becomes news, and the Kennedys read about it. And what happened next is hundreds of people started coming down on those buses out of solidarity. So this is how to create mobilisation. Mobilisation is created through sacrifice and disruption. It's not created through leafleting and emailing. It's created when some courageous individuals step forward and sacrifice themselves for the greater good. So at the end of the summer, there were 500 people in prison in Mississippi doing hard labour. 500 people. Actually, that's not many, right? It's only about 3 times the number of people in this room. It was at that point that the federal government cracked. The most powerful government in the world cracked because 500 people went to prison. And they brought in era-busting legislation. So the last example is the Children's March, 1963, Birmingham, Alabama. There's a DJ, and he sent round a secret signal, it's called D-Day, where all the kids in Birmingham, Alabama are going to come out and commit civil disobedience. He came out of school on the day, a bit like the Fridays for Future, but a little bit more dramatic. He came out, they went down into the centre of Birmingham, Alabama, went into a Baptist church, came out the front side and started marching along the road. Notice, it was an innocent act. and they all got arrested. The requisition coaches, 50 kids were arrested at a time. At the end of the first day, there were 1,000 kids in prison. 1,000 kids in prison. What happened next? Did everyone give up? No. The sacrifice inspired more people to step forward. That's how it works. More mobilisation happened. At the end of the second day, there were 3,000 kids in prison. 3,000. It kept going day after day. On day 8, the authorities gave up. They collapsed. 70 years of conventional campaigning, and in 8 days, a different tactic worked. Mass participation, civil disobedience. That's what works. You might not like it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work. Okay? This is one of the things about climate activists. They sort of criticise people who don't accept the climate science, and then they get a little bit tricky when they're confronted with the social science. Okay? Because if you're concerned about saving Brussels and Europe, what needs to happen is you need to learn from history and how people brought about change when they decided it was serious. When people get serious, this is what they do. And this is what the research of the last 30 years has shown. So I'm going to stop there, so you can have a little chat with each other for a few minutes and I can have a drink. Because I keep talking too much and I keep losing my voice. But if you want to talk, turn to 2 or 3 people next to you, someone you don't know, that's really good, they went by, ask them what they think, and have a little chat. I forgot to say at the beginning is, what I'm telling you is only my own views. So, when you disagree with me, that's cool, don't worry, it's only me. Okay, I mean, I helped set up Extinction Rebellion, but as I'm sure you know, there's lots of variety of views in Extinction Rebellion. I'm talking to you tonight primarily about my own orientation. Obviously, lots of other people have similar views, but it's my personal take on it. And I'm sort of going to continue my theme, as it were, is that yeah, it's great feeling really upset about what's going to happen and feeling very virtuous that you're going to do things about it. But what enables you to actually be successful is concrete knowledge about what to do. And that's what I'm going to focus on in this lecture. I've given you some information about the overall situation with civil disobedience, and now I'm going to give you some overall information about building a movement, which is the other side of the equation. So, one of the outcomes of Erica Chenuo's research is that one of the primary factors in whether the civil resistance movement is successful is how organised and knowledgeable the activists are. And one of the reasons the Occupy movement collapsed was because not enough people knew what to do. It just came out of nowhere. Extinction Rebellion came out of a 1.5 years of systematic research into how to organise civil resistance. And that involved practical stuff. I had to go and get arrested 10 times with my notebook. So, yeah, I'm going to give you the other side of the equation. And obviously, in an hour lecture or whatever, I'm not going to be able to give you all the nuances. So obviously some of these things are going to be a little bit simplistic. I'm hoping to give you, like, you know, the general gist, as you might say. Okay, so in the second half I want to primarily talk about movement building. And the main point I want to make is that movements are quite paradoxical. And there's this thing called the paradox of political identity. And it goes a bit like this. It's like you set up Extinction Rebellion in a town in Belgium and you're feeling really sad and lonely because no one thinks like you do. And then you have your first meeting and 15 people turn up and they're all like you and they're all shitting themselves about climate, and you suddenly have a big adrenaline rush of sort of like connection with all these people, and you keep meeting and it's fantastic and you all become good friends, and it helps you to mobilise yourselves and you're motivated to do all those boring nights in front of the computer and what have you. So the good news is that once you create your political identity, you can grow as a movement. But there's a sting in the tail, which is once you've grown your movement with that political identity, that very reason for your success is the reason why your movement doesn't grow beyond a certain point. Because after a certain point, the people that you need to come into your movement aren't like you. They don't talk like you, they don't live where you live, they don't have the same opinions and all the rest of it. And they come into your meetings and decide it's not for them and leave. Or you'll be critical of them because they haven't got quite the right same approach as you have. And so the paradox is the very reason for the success of social movements is also the reason for their failure. And to be honest, no one's quite worked out what to do about it. But there are some things that can be done, and there are some things that have to be done if we're going to mobilise a mass movement to engage in civil disobedience. When we started off Extinction Rebellion in the UK, it was basically 15 heretics. We're all on the left, but we all decided that what the left had been doing for 30 years was not successful because they weren't engaging in mobilisation. What that means is people who had radical opinions just talked to other people that had radical opinions. And what we found out from doing research is that if you want to build a mass movement, you have to go out and talk to, dare I say it, ordinary people. You heard of those? That's scary. So we didn't go and talk to Greenpeace. We didn't go and talk to the climate activists. We didn't start having meetings in a room arguing about all the things that all these people argue about. We ignored the climate movement. What we did is we went out to town halls and village halls all around Britain. We did 100 talks in 3 months. And the talk consisted of what I've just told you, which is, we're fucked. Civil resistance works. And come to our rebellion in October. 3-part talk. And it worked. Because, interestingly enough, the message of a total fact is a universal message. It's not just what left-wing activists think. If you go and talk to normal people about the demise of their sons and daughters, you will find that they're just as concerned as you are. And what we did in the UK was build a movement where 80% of the people hadn't been involved in politics before. And I've just been round doing talks to some of these 100 groups in the UK. And many of these people have never even heard of the Green Movement. But they're coming up to the front and committing themselves to go to prison. A lot of them are women over 50. Not the usual demographic, right? The reason why they're doing it is because they care about their kids and their relatives and their community and, dare I say it, their nation. So this is what we have to do. And one of the problems of Extinction Rebellion spreading around the world was lots of activists and concerned left-wing people got to hear about it on social media. And then they formed groups. You've got it with other people like them, which was great, because everyone loves each other, because we're all the same. There's a slight problem, is you get to 20 people in the room, and then it stops. And then like 6 months later, you've still got 20 people in the room. So what needs to happen is something very practical. Which is you take your geographical area, you split it up into boroughs or regions or towns or villages, and everyone goes out and covers the whole area with talks. And one of the things the research shows is that social media is actually highly ineffectual at mobilising people a lot of the time, while face-to-face contact does, because you can see people's faces and their eyes. And that's how Extinction Rebellion is being built. Obviously, partially because of the civil disobedience. The civil disobedience interacts with the talks. So you do the civil disobedience, people contact you from all around Belgium, let's say, you give them a ring, you arrange to go and do a talk in a village hall, you get 10 people involved, you train those guys to do a talk, so that those guys can talk to guys that are like them, and then you have a pathway to action, which is come down into Brussels and be arrested. And then you start again. And that's how we built the fastest growing climate change movement in history in 6 months, from 0 to 100,000 people. Obviously there's a bit more to it than that, but that's the main gist. So, I'm aware this is a big challenge, because for 30 years, progressive and left-wing people have had this idea that they're right and the other guys are wrong. But the fact of the matter is, unless we build a mass movement involving people that we don't particularly like, we're all going to die. Because only through mass mobilisation can you bring about the structural change that we need to do, which we need to bring about. And if you talk to some of your left-wing friends, you may want to remind them of the 1930s, in the face of the Nazi threat. A lot of progressives around Europe were bickering, like they are today, about who's right and who's wrong. At a certain point, the penny dropped. That if they didn't combine together, they were going to die under fascism. And it's the same today. If we don't unite people and bring them together, we're going to have fascism in Europe. So what does that mean? It means uniting with people that we don't like. And as you may know, in 1938, there was a popular front. And it involved everyone, from conservative Catholics through to liberals, socialists and communists. And that's what we need to do. We can't afford the luxury of identity politics. And if you follow this path, lots of people will criticise you. If you're not already aware of it, lots of people criticise me. But I want to make clear, it's not because I love right-wing politics or because I don't like left-wing people. I've been on the left all my life. It's that when there's an emergency, you have to get serious about what you've got to do. So that's the other side of the equation. So I've given this talk quite a lot, okay? I've been training people in these general principles for a good year. and it's been really good, and there's thousands of people that have been mobilised. And if this was a normal social movement, I'd be quite pleased with myself. But unfortunately, this isn't a normal social movement. It's what I call an emergency mobilisation. It's not like civil rights, or women's rights, or slavery, all these things. If you don't get it right this year, it's not going to get worse next year, right? It's always next year. But with the climate crisis, if you don't get it right this year, it's going to be a lot worse next year. And that means we have to become successful extremely quickly, if the truth be known. And that means we have to do what mobilises people in the most rapid way. And I wish I didn't have to say this, because it makes me unpopular, but I'm going to say it. The fastest way to mobilise people is through high sacrifice. And what I mean by that is people going to prison. This is what people did regularly during the 20th century. And my prediction is, when hundreds of people around Europe go to prison for climate activism, things will start to turn. As you may know, in April, 1,200 people in the UK got arrested in 8 days. Millions of people will go on marches for climate change and nothing happens. 1,200 people get arrested and there's a sea change in social attitudes. No one knew about the climate emergency before April to speak of. After April, 67% of the British population agrees there's a climate emergency. So that's what arrests do. But as the examples that I've gone through show, when people go to prison, it's like getting arrested, except 100 times more effective. So what we need in order to turbocharge this mobilisation is for people to volunteer, to engage in activism to the extent that they're put into prison. And that's what will bring thousands of people into the movement. After April, 50,000 people joined the Extinction Rebellion in the UK. So there's nothing unusual about this. It's happened many times in history, right? So I'm sure there's some of you in this audience have thought about it. And there's no pressure, but the fact of the matter is, some people will need to go to prison if we're going to mobilise people quick enough to deal with this crisis in the next 12 months. So you've got a form. This is Extinction Rebellion. It's not academia. You can fill in that form, and there's a little circle that says, am I willing to be arrested? So next to it you can put, and prison, or not. It's your life. It's your decision. And if you think you couldn't make that commitment, that's fine. Because all those people that are going to get arrested and go to prison need your support. And Extinction Rebellion, as you may know, is all about creating communities. Because it's through communities that people get strong enough to do what needs to happen. So I don't know which groups you're in Extinction Rebellion or if you're going to join one. But that's the discussion to be had. Is who wants to do it and who wants to support them. And I went to around like small towns in the UK. And 30% of people came forward afterwards to go to prison. Because people realise that's what needs to happen now. And then lots of other people are going to support them. I'm going to go walk their dog, always important. I'm going to pick their kids up from school. I'm going to give a financial contribution. So if you want a ticket, feel free. It doesn't commit you to anything. It's not a contract, don't panic. but it'll mean that you can be contacted about some of the things that are going to happen. Okay, so I just want to finish off on the bright side, because we're in a culture, aren't we, where if you're too miserable, you're not very popular. But the bright side of it isn't that it's all right, because it's not all right. The bright side is when things aren't all right, that's one of the reasons why they become all right. So our culture tells us this story, doesn't it? But if bad things happen, it's really bad. But the fact of the matter is, when bad things happen, it can lead to good things. And in April, thousands of people went down to London to get arrested. They're all very scared, as you can imagine. 80% of them never done that before. But afterwards, I was a little bit scared that they were all going to come up to me and say, you know, you owe me 2 weeks' wages, something like that, you know. But lots of people came up and said, that was the best 2 weeks of my life, Roger. So the bright side is that when you step up to do what's right, you become happier. Strange but true. And the reason for that you can find in all the ancient wisdom traditions of the world. And it goes like this. If you're living a lie, if you live a lie, then it's going to undermine your soul, to use old-fashioned language. If you're sitting there thinking, I know about this crisis, but I don't want to act, I don't want to accept it, you're going to be miserable. It's also going to make you ill. But when you step up and decide, I'm going to do what it takes, I'm going to step up so I can look my grandchildren in the eye, then that tension and that lie disappears, because you're doing what you have to do. And a final sort of paradox I want to share with you is I've just spent like an hour telling you how to be effective. But the people that are most effective are the people that don't care about being effective. Because they just stand up and do what's right. And the first people to build movements, like you guys, need to stand up because it's just right, not because it's going to work. And that happens all around the world. So that's my invitation to you. It's not so bad. Okay, thanks very much.